Hey everyone, it's Jody from This Day, also joined by some other familiar voices.
Hi, it's Nikki.
Hey there, it's Kelly.
As listeners have hopefully heard by now, we are halfway through our fall fundraiser for Radiotopia, which is our network of independent podcasts.
And look, one of the things that we love about doing the fundraiser is hearing from people as they support Radiotopia and finding out why you are supporting us. I mean, it means so much when we hear from you. There's actually this Slack channel where when donations and comments come in, we can see it, and I just love seeing it roll by. It's not just an ego boost to see people say nice things about us, but it's also like a real reminder of what we're in it for.
Yeah, it's really sweet. Like this comment from Chadwick, he says, I love the This Day podcast. Fantastic, educational, and fun. Oh, thank you, Chadwick.
Now, is that it? Fantastic, educational, and fun? Is that basically the only three things that matter? And is that the order? Is that the right order?
I think it's the right order. Well, I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna second guess Chadwick. I also love this one from Jared because it gets at, like, why give? This is what he wrote. What got me to donate was the idea of donating to many of my favorite podcasts, and that I might be contributing to a show that doesn't even exist yet, that might become one of my favorites. Keep up the good work.
Love that.
That's very nice. Yeah, and that's true. You are investing in Radiotopia as a whole. I will also say that Jared, who wrote that in, he wrote favorite twice with a U in there, which makes me think that he's writing from overseas. So shout out to all the overseas listeners and members of Radiotopia. But look, as Jared pointed out, donating is a vote of confidence in a business model and an ethos of collective independent creators, which, as I think you know, listeners, is very, very rare and in short supply these days.
And as of this recording, we are about halfway to our goal of 1,500 donors before December 31st. So if this day has meant something to you this year, please make your tax-deductible donation today, right on our website at thisdaypod.com. Your donation is split among all the creators in this network, so everyone really gets to benefit.
Yeah, and every gift helps get us closer to our goal. So visit us at thisdaypod.com, and thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey everyone, Jody Avirgan here. As I think you know, we often publish episodes on Sundays to try and give you a little context for what is going on in the world right now, or build off other stuff that we have been doing on the show. And you're asking yourself, wait a minute, this is publishing on like a Monday afternoon, not a Sunday. And you are right. And the reason we weren't able to bring you our usual Sunday context conversation is that I lost my voice over the weekend. Maybe you can hear that. It is just coming back. But we did want to get this episode out there. So, as you know, last week we did a two-parter on the early roots of vaccine skepticism and how it combined questions over the science of vaccine with more cultural and political movements and trends, with people finding community and agency in these groups that were fighting back against vaccine mandates, and how a fundamental lack of social cohesion and trust in government leads to moments where people can ask these kinds of questions. Of course, our general health all suffers as a result. Now, I don't need to tell you how relevant all of this is today in the present. Obviously, we saw a lot of this play out with the COVID vaccine. And then just this week, the same week we ran this series, we saw the Trump administration's CDC changing the requirement that new babies get the hepatitis B vaccine. This is the result of RFK Jr.'s ascent and the stacking of the deck on the panel that offers these vaccine recommendations. To my mind, it's now full of people who sound a lot like the people we met in our two-part series about the 1890s and the 1900s that we ran last week. I won't get into the details of how shaky the medical science and social science that seem to go into these new recommendations is. There are a lot of fact checks out there that you can read right now. But one thing I noticed, and I will point out, is that part of the thinking behind decisions like this in this moment that we're living in right now does appear to be this idea that some of these diseases are not as prevalent or dangerous as maybe a mandate for a vaccine would warrant, which, of course, to my mind, is built on a kind of forgetting, amnesia. Vaccines work best when you don't really notice them working, and I do think we are at this interesting moment of a kind of generational forgetting, and that is playing out on a bunch of fronts, actually, but a lot of the advances and wins of U.S. innovation and government from mid-century are just starting to fade away because of the passage of time, and that historical memory is seemingly harder and harder to keep. So that brings us to this Sunday Context episode, which is an episode we did a couple years ago at this point about the arrival of the polio vaccine. During our two-part series, we talked about the way in which vaccine skepticism of the early 1900s started to fade, and that was because of a rise in post-war social cohesion and a kind of fundamental belief in government projects. And of course, people react to big vaccine wins. The polio vaccine in 1954 was probably the biggest win, the biggest example of all of this. So it's worth listening to this episode again. And I will say it was recorded 4 years ago now, right as the COVID vaccine was rolling out. So you will hear some dated references. It might take you back to that moment, but take a listen. I will go drink some honey tea, get my voice back, and we will be back with a brand new episode real soon. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, February 23rd, 1954, children from the Arsenal Elementary School in Pittsburgh received injections of the new polio vaccine. The polio vaccine was developed by Dr. Jonas Salk. He'd been developing it for about 2 years, and the spring of 1954 was when the field trials for this vaccine actually began. Shots in arms. Thousands of kids, including Salk's own, were part of this first effort. Some received the vaccine, some received a fake shot, and some received nothing at all. And the start of this, the announcement of vaccine trials, as you can imagine, was a major, major milestone, a cause for celebration. It is one of those I remember where I was moments for, I think, an entire generation. I don't need to convince anyone listening now how good that kind of news can feel. And generally speaking, the vaccines were incredibly successful in knocking back polio over the next few years. But there was a rocky road ahead. Conspiracy theories, inequities in distribution, distrust of the vaccine, lots of things that sound familiar. So let's talk about this moment where the shots go into the arms and what came next with, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia. Hello, Nikki.
Hello, Jody.
And Kelly Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello, Kelly.
Hey there.
Nikki, you want to start here and maybe let's just talk about this moment. Why Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward reason. That's where Jonas Salk was working as a researcher at the University of Pittsburgh. And so as he's finally developing this latest version of the vaccine, just using local kids as a way of seeing whether or not it works, which was something that was not without risk. I mean, there had been attempts to create polio vaccine for nearly 20 years. And one of the big stumbling blocks was that they would develop a vaccine, they would give it to kids, and a bunch of kids would get polio. They would die, they would be paralyzed. And so there was a real fear that if you didn't get this right, you were just going to exacerbate the problem.
Yeah, I feel like it's always, noteworthy in some ways to sort of compare the anxiety or the fear that people had then is very similar to the anxiety and fear that people have now. And given that polio, disproportionately impacted children, I think this is something that people wanted to make sure that they got right, because you could impact someone's life for the rest of their life starting at a very young age. And so the ways in which this becomes politicized, I think, too, is also really interesting.
Yeah. And I just want to sort of reiterate that this affects kids point. I mean, I think I've probably said it on this show, but, I think the big thing I think about with coronavirus is, oh my gosh, imagine if this really affected kids. What would that be like? And, you can look to polio. And as Nikki was saying, we're talking not just about this thing shows up and then there's a 1-year rush. I mean, we're talking about an entire generation or two that's affected by this. And so this combination of living with the fear of kids specifically, the kind of fear that brings, and over the course of 5, 10, 15, 20 years is remarkable. And when you look at the development of the vaccine, it just reinforces how much of a miracle it is that, 10 months into the coronavirus, there was a vaccine, because as Nikki was saying, it was a decade of trying to find this. And Salk himself was kind of I get this weird impression, Nikki, that he was freelancing a little bit for a couple years and making this happen and then trying it on, it wasn't part of this worldwide unified effort that we feel like we're seeing now around the coronavirus vaccine.
Yeah, it's so interesting because there was clearly a sense of urgency, especially by the 1950s when there's another big outbreak. There is this sense that we have to find a solution to this because it's our kids, but also this concern about again, trying these vaccines that, that might not work, that might spread polio. And so there also wasn't the same kind of focus on like federally funded science. It's not going to be until the Cold War. I mean, this really is the moment when you start to see the kind of investment in science, but really it's happening, when John Kennedy comes around and starts talking about that the U.S. is lagging behind the Soviet Union. But in these very early Cold War years, there just isn't a tradition of the federal government investing in this kind of massive science-based program. And so, you end up with freelancers like Salk.
And then, Kelly, there's also, I think a inequity element to this as well, both in the development of the vaccine and the distribution.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things that has always gone hand in hand is race and public health. And so the ways that something like a pandemic or something like polio can play out with race, everything about this new vaccine gets racialized very quickly. And so there's fear about how will this impact Black children? Does this even impact Black children? When we think about the fact that the genesis for this vaccine started with the cells of Henrietta Lacks.
Yeah, I think this is really important, both that resistance to sharing anything about Henrietta Lacks's role in this, the idea that, quote unquote, Black cells, that there's a problem with that in the medicine. But there's also kind of a separate effort going on as well because of the segregation in medical science. So there's an effort going on at the Tuskegee Institute in order to both run tests, in order to make sure that the vaccine is safe for Black people, in order to understand polio's unequal outcomes. It's a really important moment, not just in, medical science as the hero that saves the day, but in understanding what segregated medicine looked like.
You mentioned the Tuskegee Institute, and listeners may hear that word Tuskegee and medical research in the same sentence and think about those horrific government-run syphilis experiments. But this is other research taking place at Tuskegee, the historically Black college that has its own medical research department, Black scientists working from the cells of Henrietta Lacks, a Black woman. And this is one of the few places, as you pointed out, that is looking into disease and the Black community specifically. But of course, that was not really a story that was told widely at the time, if ever.
I mean, knowing that a Black woman's cells were instrumental in bringing about a cure, I think would have turned many people off, especially during, the 1950s, where people believed that any sort of cross-contamination between the races would have been detrimental to their well-being. So this, not only does this get highly politicized, but also highly racialized in terms of how the vaccine rolls out. I think that both Black and white families have a real fear, even a legitimate fear, as to whether or not this vaccine will work. And I think part of the fear in the Black community is the fear of always being sort of experimented on, but also the overall fear of what are the long-term consequences of this and how will this, play out.
You mentioned it in passing, Kelly, but I feel like I want to hit that note about the rumor that Black people couldn't get polio.
There was this myth, right, that Black people couldn't contract polio or were somehow resistant to polio, which is absolutely not true. But oftentimes we'll find that when it comes to public health and race, Black people get erased from the conversation. And so their numbers aren't tracked very well. Their diseases aren't treated at the same proportionate rates as their white counterparts. And so this becomes a real issue for Black people, for poor people to get access to the kind of healthcare that they need to prevent things like polio. But Black people absolutely got it.
Hi, I'm Mike Troy, host of the American Revolution podcast on the Airwave Media Network. This podcast is the origin story of the United States, how we went from colonies ruled by a king to the democratic republic that we have today. The American Revolution podcast tells the story of the revolution from beginning to end. Please subscribe for free. We're available on all major podcast platforms. I hope you will join me today on the American Revolution podcast.
To my mind, the secret to buying a great gift is to be thoughtful and to buy something that also feels good for you to give to someone else. That's why I often turn to Uncommon Goods to find that perfect, unique gift. Uncommon Goods is packed with items that are high quality, unique, and often handmade or made in the U.S. Many are crafted by independent artists and small businesses, so every gift feels special and thoughtfully chosen. And here's another really cool thing that keeps me coming back to Uncommon Goods. With every purchase you make, they give back $1 to a nonprofit partner of your choice. They have donated more than $3.1 million to date. So check out the site. You will find gifts for the home, gifts for the garden, gifts for travel and the kitchen and jewelry and lots more. You will find the perfect gift at Uncommon Goods. So don't wait. Make this holiday the year you give something truly unforgettable. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/thisday. That's uncommongoods.com/thisday for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary. All right, folks, I think we might be starting to get into holiday gift-giving panic mode. The calendar is ticking by, you're staring at that list and can't think of what to get people. Well, I've got a tip for you. When it comes to holiday gifts, I always turn to beautiful, timeless pieces of clothing and accessories that I know the person I'm giving it to will wear for years. And that is why I've been turning to Quince. I picked up a Mongolian cashmere sweater there for my sister. I mean, who doesn't love a nice new sweater? Over in the accessories section, I grabbed a really classy leather travel pouch set for a friend of mine, $60. Please don't tell them, by the way. It's a surprise. And of course, as I'm cruising around, I can't help but pick up a new pair of wool pants for myself. The items are incredible, they're luxury, they're affordable. Find gifts so good that you will want to keep them with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday.
I mean, it's very similar to what we are seeing today because the experience of Black and brown people with the coronavirus isn't as visible in many white people's lives. You know, for white people who have experienced the virus as less deadly, they just kind of ignore that experience, go with their own, and then those stories fall out. But then also, like, the necessary public health responses don't get folded into the solution, because if you think of it as only a white problem, you're missing a big part of the public health equation.
Mm-hmm. And I will say that just like with coronavirus, Black people have always had to develop their own remedies. So when we think of George Washington Carver, who develops his own sort of peanut oil to serve as a remedy to polio, these traditions of finding your own remedy or creating your own remedy out of necessity or out of the neglect from the public health sphere is something that plays out today.
And again, a lot of that is a product of real distrust and a real lack of information. And as we're seeing today, there is rumors and misinformation, but there are also incidents of the vaccine not working as it should, and that can create all sorts of problems as well.
The vaccine accidentally contaminated a batch of live polio virus in 1955, which later becomes known as the Cutter incident. But lots of people who experienced this particular live polio virus died, and some people even became paralyzed. 51 people were actually paralyzed as a result of this exposure.
Yeah, and this is where I feel like the lack of a sort of steady governmental hand or unified hand, you know, whether it's government or some sort of public-private partnership or whatever, really lets incidents like that, which again, you know, when you put it in the larger context of a vaccination effort, you know, when you talk about something being 95% effective or whatever, or there are mistakes in science sometimes, but when there isn't that sort of steady hand on the tiller constantly reinforcing the importance of a program like this, then you let incidents like that, you know, they tap into an incredible distrust and fear and rumor. And we're seeing it now, you know, I mean, I think we're seeing it a little less now, but, you know, you see these like tweets about 2 people got sick. Well, it's like 2 people got sick out of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Like this vaccine is genuinely working. But when the process is fractured and there's a vacuum for misinformation or rumor, you know, then, you know, all these things play in.
Yeah, and it can be really easy to focus on the vaccine resistance, especially because something like the Cutter incident becomes sort of the origin story of the anti-vaxxer movement in a lot of ways. But there really was
a deep desire for this vaccine. People wanted it desperately. And this too becomes part of the conversation. How do you not only get this shot into as many arms as possible, but how do you make sure that that's done fairly? And there had been proposals to make this a free vaccine. And of course, it's immediately met with the bogeyman of socialized medicine, and this idea that like the free market is going to be the best way to distribute this vaccine, even though that would mean really unequal outcomes for people who didn't have the resources to go to a doctor. At this point in time, like there were millions of Americans who'd never seen a doctor in their entire life. So the idea of being able to get this vaccine was a lot more difficult than you might think, especially without a program to make sure it got to the poorest Americans.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a really good point. I think it just highlights something, again, that we're still struggling with today, which is access. And, you know, what happens when elements of cures get privatized and whose hands they get into and how you decide who gets what and when. A lot of this comes down to like dollars and cents, unfortunately. Yeah. And that is something that we're still contending with today, believing that, you know, the wealthy will always have access to this medicine first and the poor will always have access last.
Yeah, I mean, you read some of these stories and, you know, there was a black market started to pop up in late 1954 into 1955, you know, price gouging, you know, people working their angles and, again, it breaking out because there wasn't this sort of steady hand. But, you know, when you read how this played out, through 1954, you can see the vaccine rollout become this political football. And there's people in Washington saying, well, okay, you know, this should be our responsibility. And then other people are saying, no, let's kick it to the states. Like literally just using the exact same language we heard over the last year. Like, no, the states should take advantage of this, or no, there should be private companies should take advantage of this, you know. And I think when a plan hadn't been developed, you know, over the course of years and a sort of fundamental decision about how this was going to get rolled out, it becomes this football. Compare that to other parts of the world in even here in 1955, like in Canada, where there was socialized medicine, like they got the polio vaccine to like basically everyone over the course of 1955 really efficiently. And again, we're seeing all that same sort of stuff play out today.
Yeah, and just to add one more note to what you're saying, Jody, one of the people who was the biggest advocate of, let the states do it, let the free market do it, was the head of health, education, and welfare. So Avetta Hobby, who was the secretary of this department, she was one of the leading lights pushing away from government solutions, and she controlled the government department that could actually do something about distributing the vaccines.
Yeah. In looking at this and thinking about this, I think that there's a way you could kind of argue that the polio vaccine distribution is like the origin story, Big Bangs for, you know, modern conservatism in many ways, because it just creates this incredible flashpoint, as you're saying, Nikki, about states versus federal government, socialization. You know, Ronald Reagan, as he's starting his political career, he really rails against socialized medicine, and it sort of builds on these questions that came out through the polio vaccine. And then obviously the like conspiracy theory, anti-vaxxer strain of it all. But like, you know, part of me is like, oh man, maybe it all started with the polio vaccine.
I would read an article about that.
Yeah. or listen to the end of a podcast about that.
Yes.
So we should come back around as we start to wrap up here by pointing out that the polio vaccine also was a miracle, right? And it really did knock back polio. And there's incredible stories of people, you know, obviously people avoiding it and people recovering from polio. You know, it's one of those diseases that I think defined an entire generation in the way that I think coronavirus is going to as well. But it also was a true miracle of modern science.
And the fact that no one gets polio today. I mean, and when we think about the fact that this has become virtually an extinct disease that would be incredibly difficult to contract, at least within, you know, developed countries, right? So when you think about the fact that this is something that millions of children had, and then by 1962, the number of cases are less than 1,000. Yeah. You know, we can't find someone that has polio today or see it as a real risk. And that's in a short amount of time. Within, you know, less than 10 years, it becomes completely eradicated. So that's incredible.
And you see just like these remarkable stories of people who either had it or overcame it, or, you know, stories of people getting vaccinated and avoiding it.
Yeah, I think one of the most remarkable stories is one I did like a book report on when I was in the 3rd or 4th grade about Wilma Rudolph. Wilma Rudolph, the famous Olympian athlete, contracted polio when she was a child, when she was 5 years old. She wore braces on her legs until she was about 12 years old, and then goes on to become this famous track star and win all kinds of medals in the Olympics. So it does show you that even people who weren't able to receive the vaccine were in some ways able to overcome.
Yeah, I think that's such an important story to add in, because to the extent that people today are really aware of polio, I think they tend to think of Franklin Roosevelt, who dealt with the consequences of his polio and paralysis in his legs for the rest of his life. So to also throw in the story of a 3-time gold medalist at the 1960 Olympics, it shows you a variety of experiences with this disease.
Yeah.
It's not many history stories that have a happy ending. So I think we should stop
Oh shoot!
it there.
I was gonna complicate it with something, but maybe now I have to. Look, I was gonna complicate it slightly by pointing out something that I think is also another lesson for now, which is that as it became effective, the argument for it becomes less apparent, right? By definition, as fewer and fewer people have this, people feel less of that urgency. And I think that's something that's going to be an issue here, how there's going to be this first rush to the vaccine, and then there's going to be hard work as you get the communities that are most distrustful of it. And also people are just, there's less and less coronavirus, and people are feeling less of that urgency. And I think you saw that with polio as well, which again reinforces just the need for like ongoing concerted work in order to really, finish the job.
Well, you see that even with flu shot, right? Like
Totally,
people,
yeah.
maybe I'll get it this year, maybe I don't. I've gone even years without getting it, not intentionally. I just like, oh snap, I didn't get a flu shot this year.
Right.
Like,
well, it's the it's the like, I don't get the flu shot, and I'd never gotten the flu. It's like, well, because everyone else got the flu shot. That's why you didn't get the flu. So yes, tragedy that commons, I think. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kelly Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
Thank you.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Kala Nakua helps with our transcripts. You can find those at thisdaypod.com. Also on our website, you can get in touch with us and with any questions, comments, or suggestions about the show. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
We can all be proud of the Salk vaccine, brought about by American scientists and American giving.
Your child or any member of your family eligible for polio vaccine in your community should be vaccinated now. Vaccination now will save lives from death or paralysis this year. Make use of increasing supplies of vaccine. Help your child grow up strong and straight, free from crippling polio.
Radiotopia. From